how will you test customer registration web page or web portal? Okay. Now, before jumping to the answer, first thing is important that you always go ahead and clarify. If you're not sure what exactly the requirement is, how you are going to test it, right? So first thing, when you are going to test, when somebody asks you how you are going to test this, you have to first understand, you have to cross question and question the interviewer what sort of requirement are available, right? Or what exactly the person wants to test in something. You don't assume stuff, right? So first thing, always clarify the requirement from the interviewer and then start answering. Why this is important? Because when the customer says, when the interviewer is asking customer registration web page, okay, if you just assume that customer registration web page will have first name, last name, and only 2-3 fields, maybe the interviewer wants more field to be there, right? So as the person who is answering this, what interviewer wants to understand is whether you will clarify the requirements or not. And then you will start approach testing, right? But then you will approach testing, because unless until you understand what exactly you are going to test, how you are going to test, right? So this is the first thing that interviewer wants to understand, whether you are going to inquire about the details or not, right? For example, what things you need to ask on any web page, whether they ask login functionality or registration page functionality, you need to ask some set of questions, right? Now, first thing you will ask is about the UI, the user interface, right? Graphical user interface, because it's a web page, web portal. So how many fields are there? Is there first name? Is there middle name? Is there last name? Okay. Is there date of birth? What all information is being captured on that particular web page? Okay. That is the question that you have to ask. All right. Then which API is being used? Is there any API that is being used? Is it a SOAP or REST to communicate, to send this particular form information to the server? Is there any database? Which database is being used? Which business rules are applied? Are there any business rules as well? Say, for example, this information is submitted from the form. Then based on the date of birth, is there any backend business rule that will run? And then the information will be stored accordingly in the database. Okay. So these are some of the questions. Now, asking this question, before asking, you need to understand the overall service oriented architecture, right? So basically, if we put, in a very simple term, so let me open the whiteboard here. Okay. And I'll explain. Okay. So now, say for example, if I am interviewing and you are asking me the question. Okay. So I have asked you to test a web portal. Okay. So this is graphical user interface. Now you need to ask how many fields are there. So as an interviewer, I'll say, okay, there is a first name field. All right. So first name field, there is a last name field. Okay. And then there is a date of birth field and then address. Okay. So now you know that on the graphical user interface, there are 4 fields that you have to test, right? Then you have to ask, how will this data, whatever is being filled, get tested basically, right? So how will this data get transferred over the network, over the internet, right? So which web service is being used? So SOAP or REST or anything, right? Could be anything. Then how will this information that you are sending from the form will store, right? Which database is there? Okay. Where this information will get stored, what will be the tables, etc. So as soon as you will start answering or basically asking these questions themselves answer or provide the answer to the interviewer, that you actually know the overall how the applications are built, right? So this is basically, like you know that this is a client graphical user interface. Then you have, if there is a business rule, the business rule. So for example, if date of birth is, if a person entered a date of birth and based on date of birth, the age calculation happens, and based on age calculation, the information gets stored into the database. Okay. So if the person is minor, less than 18 years, based on the date of birth that is being entered, they are stored as a minor, right? Or minor flag is checked in the database table, right? So this is one of the business rule that you have to check, right? You have to ask, is there any business rule? So they'll understand that the business rule as well, right? So based on the input that is being provided from the user interface, the input can be manipulated, and business rules in the software are the rules, or basically it's just a piece of code that will see what information is being provided. And if date of birth, based on date of birth, the age is less than 18, then this particular record needs to be saved like this flag needs to be checked, right? So these are some of the common questions that you need to basically ask, right? So when we say, service oriented architecture, right, or client server, right, so these, when you segregate the graphical user interface, when you say SOAP or REST for different operations, you have different APIs available. When you have business rules, when you ask question about which database, then what all need to be tested, right? So now okay, in the graphical user interface, I'll test the validations of the first name, last name, is if there is any validation there, that special characters shouldn't be allowed, only characters should be allowed, right? Only numbers should be allowed if allowed. In date of birth, no junk characters are allowed. This is UI validation that you will test. In address, only valid address is allowed. So if any of these rules are applied or validations are used on the UI, then you will start answering that I'll test these on the UI, these things on the UI. Okay. Then if UI is not available, say for example, upfront UI is not available, okay, then I'll go ahead and straight away get the web service that is available, okay, for this address registration. Then in that SOAP or REST service, I'll provide these values and then hit that through Postman or SOAP UI or any API testing tool, and ensure that that business rule, if business rule is applicable, that gets triggered and the data is stored successfully in the appropriate tables in the database, right? So now you have explained everything end to end in a very crisp form. If you get a whiteboard, use it, okay? Ask the interviewer, can I use the whiteboard? And once you go through this process, I'm pretty sure if you explain this way, the database, the business rule, the API, the UI, the validations that you are going to test, that is not going to stop you from being selected into that particular organization. Okay, so try to answer using a graphical. If you are getting a whiteboard, use it. Okay, so this is basically how you are going to answer this question, how you are going to test customer registration web page, right? Not only I'll test the validation on the UI, I'll test this validation, that validation. No, software application is just not the UI, right? It's a lot more than that. There are APIs involved, there is a business rule involved, there is databases, there could be events, notifications, n number of things. You can expand this answer as much as you want, but this answer from a fresher to 5 to 10 years experience, whatever I have told, is good enough to prove that you actually understand how softwares are built and applications are built. Then you can go ahead and elaborate more options around events and messages and queues if you want to do that, right? But I don't think that will be required. Okay.